The Wednesday week is sponsored by the Riverside Cafe, the perfect place for a pre-match pint.
There's a chance here, a great save by Turner from McClare. Might come a terrific goal by Sheridan.
Brexman against Jones. Get in.
You could have two goalkeepers in there that would have trouble saving.
Hello and welcome to something of a special Sheffield Wednesday podcast. Now, this is the Wednesday week and the Owls and Americast joining forces. And if that isn't quite continental enough for you, we're going to throw in a bit of Danish as well. So I'm James Marriott from the Wednesday week, and we have James Allen, Manhattan Owl from Owls and Americast. Now, it would be fairly normal protocol at this stage to say good evening and ask you what you're drinking, James. But it is kind of the middle of the afternoon out there, isn't it?
It is the middle of the afternoon, but I can't really record a podcast without a beer in hand. So I've strategically taken a little bit of time off work, and in deference to our continental collaboration, I've got myself a Danish import, actually, a can of Mikkeller, which is Mastodon Mother Puncher, which is pale ale brewed with passion fruit. So I'm looking forward to a passionate podcast, and yeah, it's nice to start the afternoon off in a good fashion.
Good stuff. For the record, I've got a Wiper and True, which I think is a Bristol brewery, and this is called Kiwi Lilt. And I don't think I really need to add any words of explanation as to what kind of beer it is, considering the name kind of says it all, really. Bit of kiwi, tastes a bit like lilt. Very nice. Our third musketeer tonight joins us from, and I hope I'm going to say this right, Aarhus in Denmark, Peter Løhmann. It's even more evening there, isn't it? You're an hour ahead.
Yeah, we're now ahead
of the UK.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's pretty much bedtime over there, isn't it?
Depends. For the kids, definitely.
No,
but
it's not far off.
Yeah.
How was my pronunciation of Aarhus?
It's Aarhus, if it's to be.
I was miles off then.
Yeah, no, close enough. Usually people go into madness jabs about, our house in the middle of the street.
Yeah.
That's what people usually do about. So you're better than that, definitely.
Are you sticking to Sheffield Wednesday podcasting tradition by cracking a beer open?
Yeah, I've got a Fuller's Oak Aged Ale. It's all right. It's a beer my mum brought me, so I'm not really sure what it is, but it's okay. It'll do.
Fuller's is an American brewery. I think Fuller's is, isn't it? I think have you two just kind of swapped countries for your beers? I think that's very dignified. That's very nice. If you're kind of wondering what kind of brings us together, there wasn't anything in the Cardiff game that made us think we want to synchronise across 3 time zones to get together and chat this evening, because, to be fair, there isn't going to be that much in terms of certainly on the field football chatter, because we're actually looking at a particular subject in this podcast, which is, it's a bit of a dirty phrase in football now, and that is financial fair play, FFP. So think back 18 months ago, and the three of us took our seats at Wembley, hoping this was the day we were going to see Carlos's dream come true, Sheffield Wednesday finally making it back to the big time. I think fair to say that in no one's mind that day was the subject of financial fair play. Now, January 2018, how things have changed. So, this podcast is really kind of to do with that. If anything, I'm the interested bystander in this in this trio. So I'm going to let James pick up the story.
Yeah, no, thanks, James. I think the overriding point here is that all of our fan base talks about financial fair play pretty actively and pretty regularly. It certainly has over the last 6 months since it was raised by Dave von Chancery at the steering group last year that it was going to be an issue for us in our finances going forward. I think there are very, very few people in the Wednesday fan base who really understand financial fair play. And that probably includes, not wishing to co-opt you in, 2 of us on this podcast. So what we thought would be really useful would be to take a step back, given where we are now, with obviously the new regime taking hold on the footballing side at Wednesday under Jos Luhukay, and really trying to understand what financial fair play really is and what it means for the way in which we're probably going to have to recast the Wednesday squad over the next 18 months as we gear up for what we hope will be another promotion challenge. But it's going to have quite a direct impact on the flexibility that the club have, what we do with the playing squad. And we thought it'd be a really good idea to speak to an expert, which is why we've brought Peter into the conversation, who, as I think a lot of people hopefully will have seen on Twitter over the last couple of weeks, has been putting out some fantastic analysis of the detail behind FFP regulations and Wednesday's finances, and sort of take a deep dive into what's really going on, what we know, what we don't know, and what it might mean for the future of Sheffield Wednesday. If you like, act as a bit of a 101 explainer for the whole fan base, hopefully, but for the course of this evening, James, for the two of us. And I'll do my best to try and interpret the bits I understand from a financial, accounting and business management point of view.
Okay, I mean, we should probably start at this point with the real kind of basics as to, what financial fair play is, what the regulations are, and kind of what it means for a club like Sheffield Wednesday. So, Peter, just kind of give us that just the bare details, really. The real simple kind of what on earth financial fair play is. Well,
it was put in place because a lot of clubs were trying to outspend each other to get to the Premier League. And if you cast your minds back about 10 years, a club like Leicester went into administration a few times and just got rid of their debt, and then they could start all over by spending a lot of money. So FFP was a move that was made to stop clubs from spending themselves into oblivion, basically. And they've changed a bit over the years, but at the moment it's an allowance for a loss of £39 million for 3 years, and it's a rolling 3 years. So the current period started in June 2016. So at the end of May 2019, in those 3 years, we as a football club cannot have made an accounting loss of more than £39 million. So that's really the figure that we under Chancery is aiming to stay within.
And Peter, I think it's fair to say that straight away we're into terminology. So when we talk about an accounting loss, that is the loss of the business that is Sheffield Wednesday as a limited company, correct?
That's true, yeah. And there's also things that usually don't get taken into account in the FFP losses. Things like investments in youth development and stuff like that. But that's hard to say from like a principle that whether it's in or it's not, because it depends on an analysis that is made after the accounts are posted. So it's the figure that's easy to go with this is really the £39 million, which sounds like an awful lot of money, especially when we as a football club don't even make that in a year. But that's what we're up against, and the thing that happens to clubs if you don't live within the limit of £39 million, you risk a fine, which is what has happened to Queen's Park Rangers, who got hit with a fine of I think it was about £40 million, which if they were in the Premier League they could probably quite easily pay, but now that they're in the Championship, it's a bit of a struggle for them. So it's not just a paper thing. FFP, it's actually real and something that clubs have to take into account when they're setting up their strategies for getting to the Premier League.
So straight away we're in a situation where, as a football club, we can't afford to lose more than a combined £39 million over the course of 3 years, barring a few exceptions, which you just detailed. What's to stop a rich owner, a tuna magnate from Thailand, from just kind of pumping in as much of his own money as he likes in the form of revenue, booking that and declaring a minimal loss in a season, or even a profit if they wanted to put more money in on the revenue side?
Well, I don't really know whether there's any examples of it in the English financial fair play, but the UEFA fair play, which is for the clubs that play in the UEFA competitions, Europa League and the Champions League, they actually do an evaluation of the accounts and the income the club have, and they look at what they call fair value. So if Chancery, for instance, decide to say, okay, I want to sponsor the shirt of, let's say, Tom Lees, and I want to pay £20 million for that shirt sponsorship, I'm pretty sure the accountants at the Football League would say, well, that's not fair value. We don't consider Tom Lees' shirt sponsorship to be worth £20 million. So they take that sum of money and they'd say that is equity that you've put into the club, and clubs are allowed to put some equity into the club each season, but to a certain limit. So that's why the total losses can't be eradicated by just outspending them, so to speak.
So, in other words, despite the fact that we've got a very rich owner, and despite the fact that that owner wants to put significant funds into the club, has already put significant funds into the club, that can't go on unchecked. So the first thing we need to understand about FFP is everything that the club does in terms of maximising profitability matters, and there is a limit on what an owner, Adefon Chansiri, can put into Wednesday in order to offset it. So, and if we get it wrong, then we're in risk of severe financial penalty on a rolling 3-year basis, which is going to kick in 2019. Is that sort of fair as an approximation of where we stand?
It is, yeah. And the kick in this is really that if you do get promoted to the Premier League, and if you go straight back down, that the season you're doing in Premier League, you're allowed a bigger loss for that season than you would if you were in the Championship. So the allowances have been made for clubs that go up and go back down again, because even with the parachute money that the Premier League pays to relegated clubs, usually the clubs that come down from a Premier League struggle with the finances when they're relegated. So that's why it's always a bit tentative when you're given an evaluation whether we're within or not within the FFP regime, and whether we can comply with it or not. And the other point that you were saying, that what's to stop a rich owner from spending a lot of money. Well, the point is, we do have a rich owner, yes, but we're not alone in having that. Most of the clubs in the Championship, certainly in the top half and challenging for promotion, have rich owners. Leicester spent £120 million in the 4 years before they were promoted. Brighton's owner has put in £250 million before they were promoted, and even Brentford, who a lot of people admire because they're trying to stay within their means. Well, he's put in nearly £100 million in the last 6 years since he took him over. So it's not that by spending money we're getting ahead of the other clubs. It's that spending money like Chansiri is only getting us on a par with the other clubs in the Championship in many ways, especially because the clubs that I mentioned are clubs that had been in the Championship for a number of years. But then you have the clubs that come down from a Premier League and get about £40 million put into their coffers each season from the parachute money. So that's hard to put up a fight against financially as a football club. And I think that's often what people misunderstand about Wednesday, because yes, we're a big club historically, and our attendances are quite high. But if you look at the financial side, we're not really a top club in the Championship. We're about top 8. And if the modern adage of finances dictating league position, well, then top 8, then having been top 6 in the last 2 seasons is quite good going, considering the resources we do have at our disposal. So I think sometimes people miss the point that it's not that Chansiri has made us the richest club in the Championship. No, he's made us the 8th richest club in the Championship, so to speak.
And this is where real numbers are actually our friend, right? Because they set a hypothesis either in stark reality or they contradict it. So what do we know about Wednesday's finances today? We know that the most recent accounts, I think, were published for the season ending 2016,
yeah, that's right.
Which is the season, obviously, that we made it to Wembley. And we know that Wednesday booked revenues of about £22 million in that period. If I'm correct, if I'm reading actually the preparatory statistics that Peter provided us with, there's a lot of detail behind this conversation, I can promise the listeners. compare that to the amount of money that Hull City, who beat us in the playoff final, made in the same period. And, that they had revenues almost double Wednesday's of about £42 million, of which roughly almost 2/3 was coming from prior parachute payments from the Premier League, it's just an illustration of the financial gap that we're trying to make up on the revenue side with teams who've spent time in the top flight. And actually, Wednesday do reasonably well in terms of the revenue they generate from a championship environment. I think, if I'm reading things correctly, Peter, we're the third largest team at least in the 2015-16 setup in terms of self-generated revenue, which it says that Wednesday are in a reasonably good position, but that top 8 statistic comes from the obviously the 4 or 5 teams who've come out of the Premier League in recent years who are trying to fight hard to get back in.
Yeah, definitely, that's the issue. It's a bit like a greyhound race where you give 5 of the dogs a half a lap's head start. That's what happens with the teams that come down from the Premier League. Even like when Blackpool were in the Premier League and had a tiny wage bill and tiny attendances, when they came down, they were still one of the richest clubs in the Championship. So it's something that people need to understand, that Chansiri is not a guarantee that we can outspend other teams. It means we can probably compete on about a level pecking, but you'll still have teams that can outspend us and give more in wages and give more in transfer fees for players that we want to have at our club.
Which brings us to the other side of an accounting profit or loss, which is the amount that you spend. So, in that season where Wednesday brought in £22 million, the first year in which there was obviously a cash injection from Mr. Chansiri and the Chansiri family, how did Wednesday do in terms of profitability, and what was driving the change on previous years?
Well, we made a £9 million loss, so we're not doing greatly in terms of avoiding losses. Though, if you can do your basic school maths correctly, if you take the £39 million we mentioned at the beginning, which, as I mentioned, was over 3 years. If you divide that by 3, then you allowed an average loss of about 13 million a season. So the 15-16 season was within was a loss that was within the FFP limits. But the point is, we did spend some money in 15-16, but a lot of the players we've added, especially the more expensive players we've added, have been after that. And our turnover has probably in the last season of 16-17 has probably grown some, but I think it's unlikely that the turnover has grown and the revenue for the club has grown as much as the wage bill and the money spent on transfers has grown. So we'll probably see a loss in the financial year 16-17, which is higher than the 10 million that we had in 15-16.
And I think the reference number here is, so we made £22 million in 2015-16. In the same period, we spent, we think, about £19 million on wages. So, pretty much simple subtraction. We eliminated pretty much all the revenue we had just on the playing staff alone before we got to the operating costs of the club. And then, exactly as you said, obviously following the near miss at Wembley, we went on to take higher earners onto the wage bill, the likes of Stephen Fletcher and Jordan Rhodes, George Boyd more recently, who we have to assume is continuing to inflate the amount that we're spending on the playing staff, with the expectation that those Premier League or near Premier League players on high wages would get us over the line. And that was always the bet for the second year of FFP. 2016-17, where obviously we didn't get quite as close as Wembley, but we got fairly close. And if you were to describe a strategy, Stefan Chansiri's strategy, it was to get us up within 2 years of the FFP window, such that we could absorb a larger loss in the second year, maybe larger than that 9 million amount, breaching the 13 million in year 2. But then obviously offset that with the much higher revenues that would be associated with being in the Premier League. That didn't happen. So is it fair estimation that we are, let's assume we're above the 13 million loss in the accounts that will be published in February, and then carrying that spend into the current year? in your analysis, I think you showed that the likelihood is that we would be close to, if not breaching, the 39 million at the end of this season. Is that the right interpretation over the 3-year course that we're describing?
Yeah, I would say so. So that means if we want to, most people would agree that we need to have some new players, because some of the ones we have at the moment aren't really pulling the weight. So that means we have to sell some of those players before we bring in some other players, which we probably would have to anyway, because we've got quite a big squad. But it also means that you have to be strategic about what sort of players we get rid of and which players we sell, because that's the other issue with FFP. It's quite it's not really realistic in some ways, because accountants have their own little reality, and then there's the real reality, so to speak. So if you see like a headline, when we signed Jordan Rhodes, we signed him for £10 million. For an accountant, it's not really £10 million. So that also changes it for us, because what happens in transfers is that when you pay an amount of money for a player, in Rhodes' case, £10 million, you actually, in an accountant sense, divide that transfer fee into the years that his contract runs for, which is 3 years. So actually, in the year we bought Rhodes this year, we're actually only paying £3.3 million for him. But it also means that in the coming 2 years, we'll have our spending possibilities depressed by about 3.3 million each season, because we're carrying over, so to speak, the transfer fee we've paid for Jordan Rhodes. And the problem with Rhodes in particular, if we could stay on him as an example, if we do sell him, for instance, in January or in the summer, we'll actually get a loss in our accounts, FFP wise, because then you have to take the money you haven't put into your accounts yet from the transfer fee all at once. So that would mean we have to subtract £6 million from whatever transfer fee we get for him. Again, in an accounting sense, it doesn't make any sense. Like if you go to a store and buy a bottle of milk or whatever, you pay for that up front and that's it. But accountants do it differently. They write off the investment over the years they have the object they invested in. So that complicates matters a lot, and it also means that when you spend a lot already, it digs into the spending you could do in the future. So we actually already, people usually talk about a transfer kitty, like a wallet you carry around with an amount of money in that you can spend on transfers. And that's not really the way accountants look at it, and that's not the way football clubs look at it, because that transfer kitty you already have lots of money from that kitty that you paid for transfers already made in the last 2 and 3 years. So that's another issue, that even if Chansiri had £20 million lying around that he could just spend, notwithstanding the potential breach of FFP and a fine for that, he also has to pay in the accounts for the transfer fees he's already paid. So that complicates matters a lot, and it makes it's really. It really means that it's not very transparent what happens at football clubs when it comes to spending. So that's definitely something that I've struggled a bit with, and I mean I'm not. You were so kind to introduce me as an expert in FFP. I really just read a bit on it to get my head around it, because I couldn't really get it. So thankfully, people wiser than me have written stuff online and done articles, and the more they dig into it, the more complex it sort of gets, because there are always pros and cons to what you can do. So I mean, Rhodes is a really good example, because selling a player should mean you have money in the bank you can spend, but no, it doesn't work that way in the FFP. So if you sold him for, let's say, 2 or 3 million, which is probably about his market value, that's probably being generous at the moment, considering the last few games. It will mean that we have 2 million less to spend in the current FFP period. Strange as that sounds, that's actually the reality that we as a club have to face up to when we go into the transfer market.
That's really significant, isn't it, in terms of I've been in kind of steering group meetings and stuff when Mr. Chansiri's been there, and he makes the point of saying, I don't need money. He's not short of money. What he needs is revenue. And I think one of the things to get your head around with financial fair play is kind of differentiating between the two. You know, Mr. Chansiri he's not short of money. He's not a poor guy. You know, he's got plenty of money that he can put into the club, but it's revenue, isn't it? That allows him to spend more when there's more revenue coming in. Hence why we get things like the Club 1867 projects and things like that, which are a way of bringing some revenue in that allows him to spend more of his own money as well.
Oh, definitely. The problem I have with that is, though, if you look at the revenue sources we have as a club, by far the largest revenue source we have is matchday income. And I mean, if you want to increase matchday income, it's about last financial year 15-16, it was about £16 million, which is really, really high, actually. It's higher than half the Premier League, believe it or not. Probably because we made it to Wembley in the playoff final, which is a good payday. But the point is, 16 million out of our revenue of 22 million comes from matchday income, from season tickets and matchday tickets. And yeah, fine if you want to increase the prices, but I mean, even at that time, they were at a level where if you increase them by, let's say, 30%, there would be even more of a revolt than there are presently, because you'd have an average price for a game of football of maybe £45 at the least. And people don't want to buy that, don't want to pay that. And even if you grow £16 million by 30%, you're not really getting anywhere financially. It's not adding a lot of millions to your club. And when you're paying out maybe £1.5 million, £2 million in wages for each season for just one star player, which is what we're probably currently doing, it also puts into perspective that you can't really outgrow the other clubs revenue-wise, which is what I sometimes think Chansiri is trying to put across, that we can do that. We can catch up to some of the others. We're still lagging a bit behind, especially in commercial income, which probably has to do with our catering and especially our merchandise. But again, it's probably about £2-3 million. It's in that ballpark. And as I was saying, I mean, we're talking about clubs like Brighton who've spent £250 million in 8 years to get promoted. So it's small dice, 2-3 million. It's small dice, and it's what we can do as fans. But we as fans cannot make Sheffield Wednesday the top-ranking financial club in the Championship, so to speak. We're just up against relegated teams from the Premier League. We're up against teams that are willing to hoodwink the entire FFP project, and you're up against teams like Wolves who've really seen what FFP is and played the system perfectly the way that they've done it. So what we've done is we've bought a lot of players who we really can't sell for profit. So they're going to show up as an expense, whereas a club like Wolves, they've bought some really high profile players for insane amounts of money. But the point is, if they were not to get promoted, those players would want to leave anyway, and they'd probably make a big profit on those players. So financially, it doesn't make a difference to them that they're making this bet. So again,
and that's actually a really good point to pause for a second, Peter, because it brings us up to present day. Because, and I think there was an article that was doing the rounds last week about some of the backstory on how Carlos was appointed, and the way that some of the agent networks work in Europe. You know, so some speculation, let's call it that. You know, it's not necessarily grounded fully, in fact, in terms of how Doyen and their network work. But what it would appear to be is that the calculation that Wednesday made 2.5 years ago was to maximize the possibilities around the current revenue source, particularly to monetize the fan base that we have, which is a large fan base by Championship standards, and by taking prices to certainly some of the highest levels in the Championship, higher than many Premier League clubs, to sort of take our revenues as high as we could based on what we knew. Everybody pitching in, as Mr. Chansiri called it, and then to spend that income to the maximum effect on seasoned pros who could get us over the line. That's a different strategy to the Wolves strategy, which was buying saleable assets en bloc over the course of this summer, obviously with a very successful manager, and try and shoot within 1 year on the premise that if it didn't work, they could be sold. We don't have that same parachute, if you will, because a lot of our players are well over 30. Their market value is diminishing, and to an extent, we're now stuck with the cost base. But obviously having to cut our cloth according to FFP, and that just reveals a pivot point in terms of where Wednesday's business model is right now, because that model isn't sustainable for a further 3 years once we start to get into proximity to breach. Which, James, I think to your question, when Mr. Chansiri is looking for other sources of revenue, that would be great in a world where Wednesday were highly flexible and our fan base was at a level of ability to spend that maybe is consummate to some of the London clubs, but we know that is not the reality of life in Sheffield and the level of wealth that exists around not only the fan base but also the commercial partners that Wednesday have in Sheffield and the South Yorkshire area. So it demands a rethink as we head into the back end of the season. So that's my point of view on it. But James, I don't know if you've heard different from the steering group conversations you've been in.
I think it's probably fair to say that the conversations at the steering group meeting have been kind of clear as mud, really. I'm not sure that anyone's kind of come away from those meetings knowing where we are and kind of what our kind of strategy, if you like, is. It's interesting that probably about a year ago, maybe a little bit more, was when the subject of financial fair play was first kind of raised at a steering group. And Mr. Chansiri said, look, we don't really need to worry about it right now. But he did kind of make the point that at some point, there'll be a decision that has to be made, which is either we balance the books and we stay within it, or, if these were his words, I can go out and buy lots of players, but if we don't get promoted, then we get a transfer embargo. And he asked the people in the room what they would want to happen, and everyone kind of said, look, we've got to play within the rules. It's not a viable option to just go and splurge a load of cash on players in the hope that it gets you over the line, which we do see a lot of clubs doing, and Brighton probably a key example of that. But on that subject, Peter, kind of in your with your knowledge of financial fair play, is it as simple as that? Are there just those two choices? Do you have the choice of you either play within the rules, stay within financial fair play, you make your books balance, or you just spend way above what you're allowed to and hope that you make it to the Premier League before that kind of 3-year timer kind of ticks down to zero?
Yeah, I would say so in many ways. Well, there are different sub-strategies to the two main strategies, so to speak. I mean, clubs that do not historically have a big attendances or a big fan base, a club like Brentford, for instance, they do their own way of doing it. They sign young players at below market value transfer fees, then sell them on a few years afterwards, and they have young players joining them that would normally not consider a club of their stature, because they know that they'll get moved on to bigger clubs if they do well at Brentford. So they have a good reputation as a talent developer. I mean, that's really a strategy that we're not looking into, which I, in many ways, think we should consider, because we have the potential to be a really good place for players to develop, and we have developed some, despite our academy not being really good. We have developed some good players that we've signed from other clubs that are now playing in the Premier League, and have even been in the England squad and playing internationally for other countries. So it's not that we're not incapable of developing players, but it's just like we've given up on doing it. It's like we've been telling ourselves in the past few years that we have to sign players that have already done it, that is been promoted, won championships or whatever, played in the Premier League. Whereas if you look at some of the other clubs that have been promoted, it's not teams that are littered with players that have already been promoted before, but for other clubs. It's a mixture between that and hungry young players that are either bought from European clubs or from lower league clubs and that then blossom at the club they come to and either go to the Premier League with the club or get sold on to maybe a Premier League club or a good foreign team and move their career on from there. So I think we're missing a beat by focusing on buying players of the age of 27, 28, 29, and not looking at players of the age of 23, 24, 25, where they still have probably the top value of transfer value of their career is probably ahead of them, whereas for most of the players we have at the moment, that value is definitely behind them.
The one encouraging thing at this point, and I know, James, you introduced this by saying we weren't going to spend a lot of time talking about on-the-field matters, at least not kind of, the most recent set of games. But, we have to acknowledge that there has been a change of management at the club. And not only a change of management, but in the shift to Jos Luhukay, there's been a big signal of change in terms of the willingness to play those academy players. Jordan Thornley obviously playing on Saturday evening against Cardiff, and Frederick Nielsen and Conor O'Grady as well before him, Sean Clare coming into the squad. And additionally, we've signed Joey Pelopelisi, who I keep on saying incorrectly, especially after this very nice Michela, who is a younger player who perhaps does have more saleable value. What maybe we can kind of say at this point, and I think this is where this conversation becomes very timely, is there seems to be a recognition inside the club that we can't continue on the current trajectory, that the plan that was intended to deliver us to the Premier League within 2 years not only obviously didn't work in footballing results, but can't be sustained in financial terms. That if we are significantly in breach of the 1 year rolling loss this year, then we have to make changes to the playing squad, changes to our accounting basis next year, and thereafter, and maybe take on board more of those lessons from other clubs, which is actually quite a positive sign of intent. I guess the question it raises for me is, what's kind of the worst case of the situation that we're in right now, and what's the best case? So how quick could that turnaround be and put us on a different strategy, on a different plan, and how much are we locked into the direction that we're in right now?
It really depends on Stefan Chancheri. In my opinion, he made a strategic error by coming into the club and saying, I will deliver promotion in 2 years, because while that may have stroked the egos of our ever hopeful fan base, that's putting it kindly, it also meant that it raised expectations levels very quickly. Whereas if you look at what Jos Luhukay has done after he came in, he's really just talked down expectations. He said, we're a long way from being all right, but we're building the steps towards being better. And I feel that's the sort of way we need to go in terms of strategy as a club as a whole, rather than just also on the pitch. That we focus on doing the little and simple things right, instead of proposing grand gestures and proposing grand structures, because I think it's fair to say that, and especially going by the recent interview that Sam Hutchinson did, that the investments in the club, not in the players, but in the club as infrastructure, has not really been forthcoming, even though we got all this money. And as I said earlier, under FFP, investments in the training ground and in youth facilities and all that, in a lot of instances, that will not count towards FFP. So it's sort of like free money to spend because you won't get fined for it. But we have not spent that money. For me, that is inexplicable, because if you look at the at the lot across the city, they've been fairly successful at developing talent, also local talent. So it's not just that they pick up the scraps from Premier League clubs, but they also actually scour the local teams in the Sheffield area and the South Yorkshire area. I mean, it's a very populous area. It's the potential for finding future talents in the larger South Yorkshire area are huge, but we've not been at the races for the past maybe 20, 25 years doing that. And that's one of the simple things that you can do without spending big bucks in any way. And we need to start doing that, and we need to stop listening to fancy foreign agents and advisors, advisory boards and what have you, and just focus on building like the roots of the club before we focus on building the roof of the club. And I feel that's what's going wrong, and that's definitely a strategy for me. And it means Chancheri telling our fans that, I know I said it would take 2 years to get promotion, but if we need to do this right, it might take 4 years. It might never happen. But I don't think a lot of people could stand that. So it's a bit of a pickle that he's in, obviously, strategically, that he knows that he can't be as I wouldn't say honest, but he can't be as as business savvy as he probably in some ways maybe wants to be. That he has to toe the line of the fans in many ways, and that could really be hurting us, and that is really what is hurting us, because it's not that okay, we spent this money, so let's start all over. No, under FFP you got a hangover after spending, because as I said, the spending is divided out over the period of the contract of the players you sign. So the mad spending on older players, that hangover will carry on for the next 2 and 3 years before we're out of it, even if we sell some of them or release them or whatever. So it will take time. It's not like we can just say, okay, it's the summer now, clean slate, we release 10 players and start all over. No, we'll still have a bill of maybe £50 million that we'll have to foot before we start over. And those £50 million, obviously, they count towards the FFP limit. So that limits us in what we can do after that, even if we go with the clean slate in the summer. So in my mind, it's I appreciate that he tries to be available for the fan base, but I still don't think he's being forthcoming with what is really the situation we're in. And I think people need to know that, because as a fan base, and I'm certainly susceptible to this myself, we remember the good times we've had as a club, even though they're now quite a few years behind us, and we want to make that happen again. And that pushes us to think that, well, we're still a big club and we're still top 8 in the country and all that. But the news is, no, we're not. We're maybe a top 35 club in English football at the moment. And the sooner people realize that, and the sooner people adjust their expectations to that, the easier it gets for Chancery, for Lukai, and for the players to build a football club that can maybe not win promotion in the future, because it's not as easy as as it has been made to look in the last few years.
Peter, off the back of that, something, and I'm actually probably dropping back to quite a basic level here, but I think something that's relevant to this part of the conversation. In kind of the last 10, 15 minutes, we've touched on, there's been kind of the mention of Doyen Sports and the work and the deals that we've done with them. I heard the weekend from someone about this player from Feyenoord that we'd been looking at, that he was here, he was ready to sign, but it all came down to what the agent was asking for in terms of a signing on fee. And in a different example, but in a similar way, when Carlos left, and we weren't exactly sure whose kind of call that was, whether or not it was completely mutual. These are all situations where I've heard people say, well, does that count towards financial fair play? Do agents' fees count? If you sack your manager and you have to pay him off, does that count towards financial fair play, or is that separate? When we talk about financial fair play, what exactly does fall under it? Is it pretty much everything to do with the expenditure of the club?
It is, yeah. The only exceptions is if you make a profit, the taxes you pay on the profit as a company, that is exempted. And as I said, some of the infrastructure investments, and it's not quite clear what is included and what isn't. But definitely, if you invest in a new youth academy, for instance, you wouldn't get billed for that, so to speak. If you invest in a new training ground, let's be honest, Millwood Road wasn't even modern in the 90s, and by now it's a bit embarrassing, isn't it? So those sort of investments would be able to happen without counting towards FFP. And those are the sort of investments we need to make, because that is what will make us a better club 8 to 10 years down the line, as well as in the next 2 or 3 years.
And that's interesting as well, because that talks about an alternative investment strategy that allows the club to invest in the future, but not the immediate promotional future. By which I mean getting us to where we all want to be in the Premier League. Your question directly, James. Do agents' fees, do the spend that we incur on manager changes, etc. count? It all counts, and this is why we're in such a potentially perilous position, because those are not inexpensive costs anymore. Agents' fees, as we hear it reported, run into the millions of pounds. And I think Wednesday have actually, to this point, to my understanding, done a reasonably good job of walking away when those have been imposed. I think there are several occasions where that's happened now. But all of that counts. If you're running a small business, if you're producing something and you're obviously selling it at a certain price point. You have to load all of the costs of that production on, and that's the case with Wednesday. So, when there's a lot of debate about why the prices of executive boxes are so high, and Mr. Chansiri talks about wanting to make sure that they are economically profitable for the business, what he's doing is he's taking all of those costs, all of those fees from agents, all of the wages of players, all of the transfer fees, and he's spreading them across the operations of the business to see whether the revenue is justifiable. And that's what people need to get their head around. If Wednesday spend money, unless it's on those few items that Peter is referencing, then it counts. And therefore, Wednesday need to be very careful about what they spend on and how much they spend.
Yeah, and obviously the biggest problem in this conversation is the revenue gap that we have with the Premier League, because it means that every year you have about 15 clubs in the Championship who essentially buy a lottery ticket in the vain hope that they'll be one of the 3 clubs that get promoted and have just one season in the sun, which could set them up financially for the next 10 years if they use that money wisely. Especially with the latest TV deal done for the Premier League. I mean, you're looking at a minimum of £100 million that you'll get, and that's just in the first few seasons. Then you have the parachute payments and all that afterwards. It's a massive amount of money that you get put into the club if you happen to win a season with promotion. And we almost did it. I mean, we're just about 30 minutes away from doing it a few years ago, weren't we? So you can understand why people think that it's just a little more spending, just a little more spending. It's a very alluring way of thinking that you can outspend the other clubs. But as I hope has been made clear, we really can't do that. If we do that, if Chansiri just says to heck with it, I'm selling John West Tuna and I'm investing the $3 billion I have Manchester City style into buying world stars for Sheffield Wednesday, then we'll get a fine that we'll have to pay in the Premier League, and we'll have to sell those star players again anyway. You could go the other way, and he could say, I have to cut cloth accordingly, and the likelihood that we'll get lucky one season is probably not that high in the next few seasons because of the squad we have assembled, and he'll be pounded for that, and we'll be a less attractive proposition for a lot of players and managers as well, and maybe even for our fan base. So it's a bit of a damn if you do, damn if you don't scenario for Chansiri, but. Just to bring it back to my point, that I think in some ways he's brought it on himself, because he's not been, from the outset, he's not been realistic in trying to set expectations with the fans. He's tried to tell us that if we bought into this, if we bought the 1867 club, if we bought the 3 season tickets, if we bought this shirt at the extortionate prices he's asking, we'd get promotion. And that's just a false bargain, because that amount of revenue that you raise from that is minuscule compared to what you see other clubs getting in, and it may move us from the 8th in the financial league in the Championship to 7th, but that's not decisive, is it? So I'm just asking for a bit more. I wouldn't say honesty, because I wouldn't say Chansiri is honest. He's perhaps sometimes too honest. In his dealings with individual fans, but I'm just lacking that sort of setting the expectations right and trying to talk sense into us as a fan base, because we can get both bipolar and hysterical, can't we? At the best of times. So it's a hard situation that we're in, and it's a lot harder than I think most people realize, and it's not easily fixable. This could take at least 2 years. And that's banking on Jos Luhukay being the right guy and being able to find some bargains akin to Pelopessi and other players from for instance the Dutch league or the German second Bundesliga or wherever, which is a bit of a lottery in its own right, because there's a reason those players are playing at that level. So yeah, it's a bit of a depressing message, but there are no easy short-term solutions for me. We either rip off the bandage quickly and have the pain subside quite quickly, and then start building from there, or we peel it off slowly and postpone the pain for the next few seasons. That's really the choice we're in.
I mean, the more you look into this, the more you kind of do realise that it is almost. It feels like an almost impossible situation, and you kind of talking about it there, and I'm trying to think. Right, well, what is the answer to this? And it is really difficult to come up with it. Just to kind of put this into some kind of context, because obviously what we're talking about here and now is obviously Sheffield Wednesday. How do other clubs in the Championship kind of fare in relation to us? Because the harshness of financial fair play, to me, I'd kind of expect, well, surely every club in the Championship, or pretty much every club in the Championship, is going to be in this situation. And we as you said there, it can kind of feel a little bit depressing when you think about it and talk about it. If you look at clubs like Birmingham, who are bottom of the table, and the amount of money that they've spent over the last 12 months, and even Sunderland in the situation that they find themselves in, are there clubs where it is as simple as it looks in terms of just how much worse it is for them than it is for us?
I would say so, yeah. Sunderland in particular, because they've, as I remember reading anyway, they've carried a lot of the wages with them down. I think there's an article recently about Jack Rodwell and his wages being about something like insane, like 50,000-60,000 a week, or something like that. And he's not had a deduction to his wages after relegation, which is usually what happens when you get relegated. And that sort of mismanagement, which, let's be honest, on Sunderland have been going on for a number of years. And Birmingham, if you hire Harry Redknapp, you're not really the epitome of a well-run club, are you? So those are clubs that definitely they are in a worse state than we are, because they are the clubs that we will get to be if we continue on the current course for, let's say, 2 years. I'm quite certain of that. And obviously Sunderland are a bit different because they have a cushion from the parachute payments from the Premier League. But Birmingham have really. They've almost taken our strategy and put it on steroids because they've bought really, really expensive players with no sell-on value at all, and they've not been really good, have they? Considering the league position. But the point is,
I think it's really interesting, isn't it, Peter? That when you make that case, there's only so long that a team coming down from the Premiership can hold on to those players at high wages as parachute payments decrease. But there was a stat I saw which just absolutely boggled my mind. I think it was Stoke City that, our 22 million revenue booked in 2015-16 eclipsed what Stoke generated in matchday ticket sales and commercial revenue by some margin. But Stoke booked a total revenue of the same year of over £100 million. Yeah. So they basically took 80 million out of the broadcast contract, and it was that money that was allowing them to pay the wages that allows them to attract European, star players to the Potteries on a cold Tuesday. If Sunderland bring those players down into the Championship and those parachute payments diminish, that's a fast path to ruin, isn't it? And I guess what you're saying is that for clubs like Birmingham who don't have those parachute payments, to take on costs like they have is just an absolute catastrophe for a football club, and ends up with a Blackburn-like situation very quickly, and that's the risk that we run.
It is, yeah. I mean, it's not too many years ago that we were in London, and we were about 7 minutes away from being terminated as a company and as a football club. So it's not something to be taken lightly, in my view, because the only reason that we're still in business is Stefan Chansiri. If Stefan Chansiri tomorrow decides, right, I've had enough of this, people bickering online, and I've been surveying Twitter for several years now, and I know exactly how negative people are and all that. If he decides to say, okay, that's it, I'm packing in, my son will support some other team, we'll find somewhere else to invest. That's it. We're screwed. And the same thing is true for about 16, 17 of the clubs in the Championship. If the current owner decides to say, okay, that's it, I'm out of it, I'm selling, then they'll struggle. Especially if Chansiri cannot sell us for the same price that he bought us for. And he'll probably want to hold out for a decent fee for the club. And who's to say that he wants to stay? I mean, he's saying things to the contrary. I realize that, and he's been very very forthcoming in saying he's a loyal guy and he wants to stay for the bitter end, and this is a long-term thing for him. But I mean, it for me, if I was in his shoes and I'd had the reactions that he's had, and the petulance that our fan base can sometimes throw up, I would have been gone for a long time ago, and found some other club to invest in, because it's no longer really about having a large organic revenue base as a football club, because we have that. If we stripped away all the malarkey with the TV money and all that, we'd be a top 3 club in the championship, and we'd probably be a bit annoyed about not being in the top 14 in the country. Because if you look at you mentioned the clubs in the Premier League before. I mean, our matchday income dwarfed that of half the Premier League in 15-16. Just to put that into context, and it's I mean, that says it all about us having an organic base as a club that is better than most clubs. But the point is, these days that does not count, because everyone's got a rich owner, because everyone's buying a lottery ticket to get to the Premier League, to extract hundreds and hundreds of millions of pounds to their parent companies here, wherever they are. I mean, look at the number of foreign owners in England compared to Germany, compared to France, compared to Spain. There's a reason they're coming to England, because the lottery ticket, the potential payout in that lottery ticket is a lot higher in England than it is in the other countries. And you don't. I mean, the perverse thing is, for the last 20 years, rich owners getting into football have not gotten into football for financial reasons. They've done so because of sentimental reasons, because they supported the club, because they wanted to spend the money that they earn on something fun and what have you. But we're actually seeing a change now, and I mean, the Glazers at Manchester United were probably the first change of that. That people come into football now, buy football clubs, because they know they can make a profit. And if you look at the Premier League clubs, the profits they make these days, it dwarfs our entire revenue several times over. And that's a profit. That's not the revenue. That's a profit they take out every year, which means they can enlarge the stadium. They can enlarge ties with other countries for commercial revenue. They can obviously buy the best players, pay them the highest wages, and so on. So that's really the reality we are in. It is that every club's got a rich uncle bankrolling them, and we're no different. But our uncle isn't richer than the others, and even if he was, which he isn't, he couldn't spend all his uncle riches on us if he wanted to, because of financial fair play.
On that subject, and I'm going to say this is a question. I don't know whether it is or isn't, but it's just, I guess, a scenario really. To clarify before I say it, I am in no way suggesting that Sheffield Wednesday or any other club would do this or is looking at doing this. But generally, the owners of football clubs are generally people that have other business interests, that have other businesses. Would there be a reason why, if football club A were to go out and buy a football player whose wages needed to be £30,000 a week, would there be anything to stop a football club paying them £5,000 a week, but then they also have a contract with a completely separate company? Let's say it's, I don't know, a furniture removal company, which happens to be owned by the same owner, who pay them £25,000 a week in consultancy fees. I'm not suggesting there's any clubs that do this currently or would even consider it. But is that something that could ever happen? Are there safeguards to stop that kind of thing happening?
As I understand it, there are, yeah. I mean, we saw that with the whole. Wasn't it Carlos Tevez? He was owned by an entity outside of football, a non-football club. But I mean, it's as I understand it, it's quite prevalent in Spain and Italy, especially that you have third-party owners owning a share of the players, and even other clubs owning shares in players, and that makes transfers quite complex. But the short answer is you can't really do that, because I mean, if the FFP regulation guys at the EFL pick up on you as I said before, the fictive £10 million shirt sponsorship deal for Tom Lees's shirt. If they pick up on that, they're sure as hell going to pick up on people in this way trying to fund a club without having the funds appear in the accounts of that club.
Yeah, and there's something in accounting policy called related parties clauses, which essentially obliges people who are putting revenue into either a company or an affiliated company who are a majority shareholder to disclose those payments. So if you look at our most recently published accounts, for example, Mr. Chansiri has to make a disclosure about the sponsorship deal that the Chansiri family made, or the Chansiri organisation made for the North Stand, as was a couple of years ago. And the same thing would be true for, I would imagine, some of the organisations which have been set up around Wednesday in the last couple of years. That there's a limit in which how much they can put in on the fair market value that Peter described earlier on. And I think that's kind of the logic you have to apply to all of this, which is that ultimately FFP is adjudicated by the league. They have their own accountants. They're smart enough to be able to ask pretty sensible questions, such as, is this a reasonable amount to pay a player of this market value on a weekly basis? So, you say you bring a player in from the Premiership and he was previously on £35,000 a week, which is probably low by Premiership standards, and you're paying him £5,000 a week. That's going to be a red flag that something dodgy is going on, and there's somebody or something behind the scenes which is cross-funding it. So you kind of play yourself into trouble if you were to go down that route. And I would imagine that the consequences of hiding payments or revenues in that way would actually be much more significant than just the straightforward FFP fines of breach on a year-by-year loss basis as well.
Just to add, if you did that in the UEFA regulations for the FFP, you'd get barred from playing in the Champions League and the Europa League. So that's for a lot of clubs in Europe, that's the main income they'll have. That's the Champions League. So that's a big thing for them. So that's an incentive to not do it, really.
I mean, Peter, kind of taking everything into account that we've kind of discussed over the course of the last hour, and particularly with kind of the hints that we've seen at a slight change in our approach, maybe putting a little bit more kind of trust and giving our kind of younger players a bit more of a chance. Do you think that maybe we've just about got this in time? Or do you think that the conversation that we've just had about financial fair play will be the first of many very serious conversations about financial fair play among Sheffield Wednesday fans over the next year, 2 years?
Well, that's a tricky thing because, again, that depends entirely on Defon Chansiri. He could decide to say, okay, I'll go out with a bang and then just throw everything he has financially at it for one season and try to get promoted. But I'm seeing Jos Luhukai's appointment as a signal that, as you were saying, that he's choosing to both comply with the FFP, which he actually disagrees with, which I also do for different reasons than him probably, but I actually do. But you can only view Luhukai's appointment as someone who builds a team slowly, and yes, he's had teams promoted in Germany, but his effect on teams has usually been to get rid of a lot of deadwood and get the team playing football again. Instead of trying to appoint someone who will get us promoted, which I actually don't think Luhukai has been appointed to do, I think he's been appointed to get us right and put us on a course again instead of being rudderless, which we have been for maybe since the summer, maybe before the summer, when you look back on it anyway. So I think this can be salvaged definitely, and if you look at some of the teams that have gone up. Maybe partly lucky, but also partly through being thrifty. Huddersfield is a good example. You can actually try to cut your cloth accordingly and still be successful for one season, which we did actually in 15-16, because we only in inverted commas only made a loss of 9 million, but nearly made it to the Premier League, didn't we?
It's amazing. And if you talk in Sheffield terms and you talk about only making a loss of 9 million, I mean, it's remarkable what football has done, hasn't it? Or how football has changed, that you can talk about a club like Wednesday being able to afford to make a near £10 million loss and to consider that a success. But
actually, if you look at the just to make a small point, if you look at the Wednesday accounts, when you make a loss, you have to tell the tax authorities that you made a loss, and then the tax authorities will add that up to the loss you've made before. And there's a wonderful line in the accounts where it says that Wednesday have now made a combined loss of £65 million, which is the losses we made in the last God knows how many years that they've added up. Yeah. So we've never made a profit, or not in many years anyway. And that's not what FFP is about. FFP is about limiting clubs by being spending extortionate amounts of money to be successful. It's not trying to make them a profitable business, because football will never be profitable for more than maybe 40 clubs around the world.
It won't be in this current incarnation. Ironically, the one year we did register a profit was the year, I think, that the ownership changed hands to Milan Mandaric, and we wrote off all our debts. So we made on paper a very tiny profit. But you're absolutely right. I mean, it's a litany of losses, and just an exemplar of how modern football has changed. But I think, to revert to the question you're posing, James, has this been caught in time? There's one other indicator that suggests that Wednesday are changing their strategy, and that's the appointment of Ketria Mier as our CEO, which, obviously on face value was met with a lot of derision because of her record at Charlton and the relationship she had with the fan base there. But if you look at the underlying role that she was playing, there was already a downward trajectory at Charlton when she came in. I think there was a recognition that they needed to adjust to life well outside the Premiership and obviously descending into League One. And she, to an extent, was responsible for steadying their financial ship, albeit perhaps not in a way that resonated well with the fan base, in the face of FFP regulations and keeping them within those guidelines. And if you take the controversy away, if you assume that she's learned some lessons from that experience, which current communications would suggest that at least she is on record as saying that she has, then there's an indication that Mr. Chansiri and Wednesday are looking to try and more overtly manage their cost base, certainly on the playing side, in terms of direct contract negotiation, thinking more carefully about the type of fees that they expend, and trying to cut our cloth accordingly so that we mitigate the pent up losses that are already locked in due to the contracts that we've signed and due to the fees that we've paid. The other advantage is that we haven't paid too many excessive transfer fees. So Rhodes is to an extent an exception in the higher end of the range at Championship levels that we're obviously carrying on a book value basis year by year. The majority of other high earners that we've brought on have been free transfers. George Boyd, Stephen Fletcher, we didn't pay an upfront fee. So although we're carrying their wages, we don't have to carry that book value of a transfer fee to expend as well. So there are some glimmers of hope and some glimmers that we are catching this in time, but I think, to Peter's point earlier on, it's not a one-season correction. And to the Brighton example we keep on coming back to, it took them 5 years to get to the Premier League while still injecting a significant amount of cash behind the scenes. So this all points to us having to take a more realistic view to what's possible for Wednesday in the short term. And I guess that's kind of probably an appropriate point to bring the conversation to a head. We've spent over an hour, going into the details of what FFP is, the reality of Wednesday's finances, what is not possible. It's probably a good place to end on a slightly more upbeat note that this is complex. This is going to define how Wednesday go forward. It's certainly going to define the way that Loss Urukai reshapes the squad, but there are positives out there, and we have to hope that this is the wake-up call that Wednesday needed to change course and to set on an upward trajectory. So I think, from my point of view, Peter, I'm hugely thankful to you for your insight and the detail that you've brought to the conversation and helping our fan base, I think, to grapple with what's a really difficult subject to get your head around. And hopefully this conversation has done something to help at least those people who've stayed awake for the last hour to do just that. So, James, this has been probably the first collaboration that we've directly done between the Americast and the Wednesday week. I guess if anybody has any other subjects of interest, we can try and delve into them in another panorama-esque episode in a few weeks' time, or not, as the case may be.
Yeah, absolutely, and obviously we are kind of blessed now with a number of options for any Wednesday fans that do enjoy listening to podcasts. Obviously, the Wednesday week, I'm guessing most people listening to this will be aware of. You can catch up with what we're up to thewednesdayweek.co.uk. Find us on Twitter at TWWcast. James, do you want to give a mention for you guys?
Absolutely. You can find the Owls Americast on Twitter at Owls Americas. The constituent members are all there. I won't list them all off, but Jeffrey Paternoster is your man if you want to find him for both baseball and football chat. And I'm at Manhattan Owl if you want to abuse my take on financial accounting practice.
And Peter, does tonight mark the beginning of the Danish Owls cast? Is this likely to be coming soon?
I think I would be taking it a bit too far, but I've really enjoyed being able to talk to you guys tonight, and it's been a pleasure to being on tonight. And if anyone's even more masochistic and wants to hear more about weird analysis of statistics related to football on Wednesday and accounts, then my Twitter is at PLOEHMANN. But I've already warned you, it can get a bit technical there sometimes, but just pop in, and if you have any stats related or accounts related, I guess now as well, questions or queries, then just shoot. I like looking at numbers, I guess, and spreadsheets. So there you go.
I would echo that and say that kind of the stuff that we've talked about, the stuff that we've touched on tonight, and we've talked for more than an hour and still barely really scratched the surface of the complexities of financial fair play. Obviously, Peter, your Twitter has a multitude of kind of links to analysis that you've done. I know you do a lot of links to other pages that are really interesting as well. So if financial fair play is something that you it's kind of, this has wet your whistle a little bit for finding out more, then have a gander at Peter's Twitter and see what else you can find. But that, I think, will just about bring us to the close of this kind of special collaboration podcast, as James said. Could well be the first of many. Any suggestions for anything else that you'd like us to kind of get our teeth into, please either drop me a line. You can get me at James Marriott, or you can get hold of James at Manhattan Owl, and hopefully we'll speak again very soon.